Smash that subscribe button before diving into this wild roller coaster, because what started as a quiet Saturday morning in my peaceful neighborhood turned into an all-out HOA showdown when Karen, the queen of petty rules and constant complaints, found her entitled son's shiny new car tangled in my fence, and then had the audacity to tell the cops that I should pay for the damage. What happened next had the entire block peeking from their blinds and cheering when the tow truck rolled in. It was one of those mornings where you wake up thinking the day is going to be simple, calm, maybe even boring, and you're fine with that because sometimes boring is exactly what you need, but life rarely lets you stay in that zone when you live across the street from a woman everyone in the neighborhood calls Karen, because she is the president of our HOA and the self-appointed sheriff of our cul-de-sac, always writing up notices for grass that isn't trimmed to regulation height or paint that looks too bright for community standards, and it had been years of her passive-aggressive notes on mailboxes, anonymous complaints about people's pets, and threats of fines that made the rest of us both dread and laugh whenever her name came up in group chats. So imagine my shock when I woke up to the sound of a loud metallic crunch that rattled my windows and sent my dog barking like crazy, and when I stepped outside, barefoot, coffee in hand, I saw Karen's teenage son, a cocky kid who had been bragging about his brand new car for weeks, sitting behind the wheel of that very car which was now nose deep into my wooden fence, the boards cracked, splintered, and leaning at odd angles as if a tornado had slammed into them, and before I could even ask if he was okay, Karen herself came storming across the street in her robe, phone in hand, screaming at me as if I had somehow summoned my fence to leap out into her precious boy's path, yelling, "This is your fault. Your fence is too close to the road. You'll be paying for this damage, and I'll make sure the HOA fines you too." And I stood there dumbfounded, because my fence had been approved years ago by the HOA itself, long before she ever took the throne. But before I could even respond, the kid, clearly shaken but trying to act tough, jumped out of the car and said, "Yeah, officer, when you get here, you'll see this fence is built wrong. It caused me to lose control, so the homeowner should pay." And I nearly spat out my coffee because not only had no cop even arrived yet, but this brat was already rehearsing his victim speech, and sure enough, within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, and suddenly neighbors who had been invisible minutes earlier were peeking out their windows, some slipping quietly onto their porches to watch the drama unfold, because let's be honest, nothing spices up a Saturday like Karen making a fool of herself. And as the officers walked up, Karen launched into her tirade about community safety, about fences that endangered drivers, about how I should be fined and forced to rebuild, and she even tried waving around a stack of HOA papers like they were legal documents, but the officers calmly asked for her son's license, registration, and insurance first, which immediately made him nervous because he had just gotten the car a month ago and I overheard him mutter about forgetting to update his insurance, which was red flag number 1. And then as the cops inspected the scene, they noticed the tire marks stretching half a block down the street, swerving wildly before plowing into my fence, and one of the officers looked at him and said, "Son, you weren't just driving. Looks like you were speeding and lost control." And he stammered, No, the fence. It came out of nowhere." While Karen jumped in with, "Exactly, officer, this fence is dangerously close to the road. It needs to be removed, and the HOA agrees." And I couldn't help but finally speak, pointing out that the fence was fully compliant, approved, and had been standing there safely for years without a single issue, and I even pulled out my own copy of the HOA approval letter, laminated because I knew exactly the kind of neighbor I had across the street, and when the officer compared the paperwork and saw that everything was legal, I swear I saw him suppress a smile as he turned back to Karen and said, "Ma'am, the problem isn't this fence, the problem is reckless driving." And that's when twist number 1 landed, because they ran her son's license and discovered not only that his insurance had lapsed but also that he had a previous citation for speeding just last month, which he conveniently hadn't mentioned, and as the cops broke that news, Karen's shrill voice grew louder, insisting that this was harassment, that they should be citing me instead, but the more she protested, the more the officers seemed convinced she was trying to deflect blame, and then, to everyone's surprise, one of my neighbors, Mr. Thompson, a quiet retiree who rarely speaks to anyone, came strolling over with his doorbell camera pulled up on his phone, and he said calmly, "Officers, I think you'll want to see this." and played a crystal clear video of Karen's son tearing down the street at ridiculous speed, music blasting, swerving, and then slamming directly into my fence without me or anyone else involved, and the whole crowd gasped because it was undeniable proof, and Karen, realizing she was cornered, tried one last desperate move, shouting, "Well, if the fence wasn't here, he wouldn't have hit it." To which the officer replied flatly, "If the fence wasn't here, ma'am, he would have gone through the yard and into the house. He's lucky he hit the fence." And at that, silence fell except for the sound of the tow truck that had just arrived, and when the officer gave the order to impound the car for lack of insurance, the entire neighborhood burst into whispers, chuckles, and even a few claps, because for once, Karen wasn't getting her way, and as her son's precious ride was hauled up onto the truck bed, his face red with humiliation, Karen stood fuming like a teakettle about to explode, muttering that this wasn't over, that she'd take this to the board, which made everyone laugh because she was the board, and yet no one was going to side with her after seeing that video, and I just leaned on my broken fence, sipping what was left of my coffee, and said, "Karen, don't worry, I'll be sending you the bill for repairs. Your son's insurance can handle it, once he actually gets some," and the officers smirked as they drove off, leaving Karen and her son to march back home, humiliated, while neighbors shook my hand and patted my back, saying justice had finally been served. But the story didn't quite end there, because the following week she actually tried to issue me an HOA fine for improperly maintained fence appearance, citing the damage her son caused as if it was my negligence. But this time, instead of getting angry, I printed out the police report, attached a copy of the tow order, and mailed it directly to every HOA member with a note that said, "If the president wants to fine me for being the victim of a crime, perhaps we should hold a vote." And wouldn't you know it, by the end of the month, Karen was voted out of her HOA seat in a landslide, her reputation destroyed, her son grounded without a car, and my fence repaired at their expense, stronger than ever. And the best part? Every time I sip coffee on my porch now, I see Karen walking by, glaring, powerless, while the neighborhood waves at me like I'm the hero who finally stood up to the HOA tyrant. And honestly, it feels pretty damn good to know that sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door. It crashes straight through your fence, gets towed away, and leaves you with the last laugh.